Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is McKay Allen. I'm the Inbound Marketing Manager here at Log My Calls, and thanks for joining us. We have a fantastic webinar today. I'm excited about it, and we're excited that you're here. Today's webinar, as you can see on your screen right now, is titled Brand Campaign, What is it and Why Do I Need One? And Lois Brayfield, the president of J.Schmid CEO, is going to present that to us, and we're excited that she's here. We'll introduce her in a moment, but first, just a couple of announcements. People often ask, who is Log My Calls and why do you do so many webinars? Log My Calls is a call tracking and call analytics tool. So we work with marketers of all types to tell them which campaigns are producing phone calls for them. So if you're spending money on AdWords, how many phone calls is that producing? If you're spending money on organic search results and SEO, how many phone calls is that producing? And then the thing that makes us very different than other companies that do that is we actually run all of our calls through a speech analytics engine and analyze the content of the conversation itself. So we're able to tell you, did this call convert to a sale or an appointment or a reservation? Or was it a good lead or a bad lead? Was there a missed opportunity for more revenue or for a sale on the call? So long story short, we're able to give you a ton of data about phone calls. That's really what our focus is and what we're about. So that's who we are. Then you'll notice here, we do a ton of webinars. We do about 2 webinars every single week. Next week, for example, we have a webinar with the CEO of HEYO and the Director of Customer Success at SEMrush. We have a webinar the following week with the founder of the Location-Based Marketing Association and the founder of the Marketing Spot. So these are really high-quality presenters. And we do these webinars because we want to provide useful content for you to help you market more effectively. And then it also gets us in front, obviously, of marketers. So thanks for attending our webinars. If you go to logmycalls.com/webinar, you can access all of these webinars, both future and past. And the past ones, you can actually watch the recordings of the webinars. And then in more of them, we're actually doing transcriptions of the webinars as well. So you can read them if you don't want to watch the video. So, so you can see here, for example, last week, you can watch this webinar, watch this webinar, watch this webinar. Anyway, you can see how it works. So along with that, we are going to be recording today's webinar. So we encourage you to watch in your email inbox tomorrow morning. We'll send that recording to you. And then the biggest announcement, I suppose, is to please ask questions today. You can see in the little question bar on your screen there, just type in questions there, and at the conclusion of Lois's presentation, we'll address those questions to her and she can answer them. So with that, I want to introduce Lois. She is, I believe, there's president I've written somewhere and then CEO elsewhere of J.Schmid in Kansas City, so we'll have her clarify exactly what she does. But she's worked with some of the nation's leading companies: Hallmark, American Express, Sprint, IKEA, Brookstone, Sears, lots and lots of companies. She was named Kansas City's Direct Marketer of the Year and has been on various boards and advisory committees for the Direct Marketing Association. So we're thrilled she's here, and we're really glad that she's agreed to join us today. So Lois, thanks for taking the time. I'm going to give you control of the screen now. And yeah, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, McKay. I really, truly appreciate it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. And the president of our company, I'm sorry, that is outdated, is Brent Nemeth. I'm actually the CEO. They bumped me down sideways, I'm not sure which basically stands for Chief Engagement Officer. I'm not big on titles, though, so let's put that aside. Again, I'm excited to talk about this particular topic. Several months ago, you had me do another presentation on calls to action, and I mentioned the concept of a brand campaign, and several people seemed interested in learning more. So we thought we'd go in a little more depth. So basically, we're here today to learn what it is and why do I need one. Now, I assume many of you are direct marketers, and traditionally, direct marketers have never needed to have a brand campaign. Traditional retailers or big advertisers have been doing them for years, and but because the world has changed so much, it's so important that we stand out in a noticeable way, and a brand campaign can really help you do that. So let's go ahead and get started. this presentation is really going to be broken down into 3 different areas. Basically, what is a brand campaign and why bother? Second, creating your rally cry, that's what I call it. And number 3, probably the most important, the meat of the presentation, is positioning for success. Okay, so let's get started. So a campaign is very similar to going to war, because you're trying to gain something back, either gain market share, get your customers back. You want to, or you just want to stand out. And so I liken it to the movie Braveheart, one of my very favorites. But it's very similar to that. You want to gain something back. Now, defined, it's really just a strategic and methodical series of events that you deliver across multiple channels or tactics and express your brand in a very meaningful way. The goal, of course, is to engage and excite customers, get them to like you and prospects. But ultimately, what you're trying to get is what I call brand stickiness. And that's very, very important in today's marketplace, because the consumer loyalty has dramatically decreased over the years. It's much, much harder to capture the heart of the customer and to keep them. And unfortunately, we think we do brand campaigns when we throw out offers, like a buy one, get one free, 20% off. And those are just short, temporary bribes to customers. And you can get them to raise their hand, but that doesn't necessarily mean you get them to stay. And many of those offers are what I call cost of entry benefits. Like we say, oh, we have great customer service. Okay, well, that's expected. Or 100% satisfaction guaranteed. That's expected. And unfortunately, even free shipping is sometimes expected. And everybody keeps raising the bar on these different, quote, offers. But that's not what a brand campaign is. We've also learned through research that growth can be very, very difficult. And, customer satisfaction, it can be regulated along with customer value, meaning customer loyalty. And you can't really move the needle just doing these small incremental things. Instead, you truly have to over-fulfill their expectations. And only then can you create that customer value. And this was proven over and over again in empirical studies. So basically, you have to wow them, truly wow them. And that's when extreme loyalty occurs, when you can surprise, thrill, or captivate them, okay? And that's where a brand campaign comes in. That's what gives you the forum, the tactic that allows you to do so. And yes, brand stickiness is the ultimate goal, but there's all kinds of things that you can do, reasons that you might want a brand campaign. Number one, of course, awareness. Or maybe you have a new product launch that you're trying to get out in the marketplace quickly. A campaign is the perfect way to do that. Or a special event. We have a customer right now that is going to announce their 200th year anniversary in 2016. So they're thinking about that brand campaign now, because it can take time. Or it's to change perception. Let's say you're a 100-year-old brand. Look at JCPenney. They did this whole campaign. Now, it failed, but they did a campaign to try and change perception. And there's lots of reasons why it might not, lots of opinions on that. I personally don't think that Wall Street waits very well, so sometimes these things take time. And then, of course, ultimately to gain market share. So number 2, let's talk about your rally cry. And that's really what it is. A rally cry that everybody can get behind, your entire company can get behind, and one that really truly matters to your customer. And it's very strategic in nature, just like going to war. You don't just barge in and start doing things. Well, some people do. But it really requires that strategic thinking. I almost can see, the map on the table with all the different bits and pieces and the tanks being moved around. It's very strategic in nature, and it has to be thought, from a 1,000-foot high point of view to look at the whole picture. Very strategic. But it really starts with, why are we going to war? And it really begins with your brand, those 3 little questions that defines who you are as a brand. And the 3 little questions are basically, who are you, what do you do, and why does it matter? The first one is really about your position in the marketplace. Where are you? And most brands really have a great idea about where they are and where they sit with their competition. But I would only say that maybe 50% of the brands out there understand question number 2. And that is, what do you do that makes you unique? How do you stand out? How do you stand out in the marketplace? And that's so important in today's world, to stand out. But the third one, and I would say maybe only 10% of the brands really understand this, the why. Why does it matter? And at the end of the day, it's about that emotional connection. So backing up a bit, just to reiterate how important it is that you are unique in your marketplace, because the brain is hardwired to notice what's different, not what's the same. And even though you may be selling the same product as your competitors, it's critical that you twist it in some way to really stand out and be different. And if it's not there already, then you'll have to create it. But really, that why is what I want to talk about, because that becomes the true foundation of your brand campaign. It's what we also call the higher order benefit, or some people call it the brand essence, the essence of who you are. It's truly the emotional reason customers choose to do business with you. That's the why. Why do they choose to do business with you? And I'm sure you've been following a lot of the research in neuromarketing. It's been fascinating over the last 10 years what they've learned about the human psyche. And they've been able to truly investigate brain activity and examine and analyze what drives behavior. And they've found it's really these emotional connections, like I crave something, or I think I'm cool because I have this, or I want to collect something. There's parts in the brain that literally light up with these different kinds of emotional takeaways, like fear. And in the book, and I highly recommend the book Biology by Martin Lindstrom, he was able to prove that nearly 90% of our buying behavior is unconscious. And we can't always explain those preferences, but ladies, it's why we're willing to spend $400 on a purse. That's not necessarily rational. We can try and rationalize it. It's emotional, because either it makes us feel good, look good, or raises our self-esteem in some way. And I think it's critical, in order to have a successful brand campaign, you really truly have to know what that emotional takeaway is, because then you can use it in a very powerful, powerful way. It becomes the blueprint or that foundation for the campaign. A couple brands that I think do it very, very well, one of them is Disney. They understand that they're selling magic. You know, they're not selling theme parks. They're selling this magical moment, you know, in your child's history, this time that the family can get together and have this magical experience. Starbucks, they truly understand, and they talk about it all the time. It's not about the gourmet coffee. It's not about the barista. You know, it's about the ability to escape and indulge. There's, you know, a $5 cup of coffee is not practical. There's an indulgence that goes on there. Apple, you know, one of the most famous and powerful brands in our history, they understand that what they're really doing is providing you, helping you reach your creative potential. Now, I personally think it's a little more base than that. I think it just makes people look cool. They get it because it's a cool brand, and they want to be a part of that cool brand, but that's my personal opinion. Super Bowl ads. If you look back at the Super Bowl ads that you've loved the most, the ones that, you know, always win as being the most favorite, usually they're tied in with some kind of highly emotive theme. In 2013, I just have to show this picture, and you immediately know what commercial that was. You know, it was the relationship and the bond between this man and the horse. And, of course, it's Budweiser. And it was so successful, they followed up in 2014 with that relationship between the dog and the horse. And what's interesting about this is that I actually saw an interview with the creator of this, and they started with their higher order benefit, and that was all about connections. they're in the business of connecting people, either at a bar over a beer, right? Or watching the game on the couch, connecting friends, or connecting friends at the Super Bowl, wherever it might be. So they took that basis and they tied it into their commercials in a very highly emotional way. I mean, who can't resist a puppy or a pony? So it was very, very successful because they really, truly understand what they're all about. Another case study, you may not be aware of this brand, but just to show you the power of it, this brand is called winetasting.com, and basically they sell these incredible curated blends of wines all from the Napa Valley. And, they were doing okay, but basically they were presenting the product and just product alone. It was just bottles of stuff. But when they went back and asked themselves 3 questions, what is it we sell, the curated wines, where do we sell it? This is what really made them unique. It's in Napa Valley. And there's a strong emotional connection to those people that have been to Napa Valley. They remember that experience, so that became a real true point of differentiation. But the why, at the end of the day, is about sharing. Sharing the bottle of wine, sharing it with a loved one or a friend or someone special. These are expensive wines, and you typically just wouldn't drink it by yourself, but you would share it, and that's the why. That's why people are willing to spend that much money. So in their brand refresh, they embraced all 3 of these. It was a layering effect. They still sold the product. That was most important. But the where became as equally as important, reminding people of that special connection with Napa. But then the hint of the why, the sharing. And this is another one of this is a spread in one of their catalogs. Again, the wine that's so important. And then the reminiscent of the Napa Valley, but again, pulling it together with the sharing of a bottle of wine. A case study that I was just completely fascinated with, because I think they did it so well, is a brand campaign that BMW did several years ago. And they so clearly know who they are and have been able to answer these questions. They understand their position in the marketplace. They sell luxury cars. But what they do that's different and unique, it's about performance, the ultimate driving machine. That's what sets them apart from other luxury cars. Where Lexus can claim luxury, or, Mercedes can claim engineering. BMW, they claim performance, the ultimate driving machine. But that's not necessarily a higher order benefit. That's not an emotional takeaway. Their emotional takeaway through this brand campaign was joy. And I don't know if you remember, but the whole series of commercials and campaigns around joy is BMW. They came right out and said it. They didn't imply it, they said it. And it was a highly successful campaign for them. So why really truly becomes your rally cry? And before you even think about it, I just, again, strongly recommend that you identify what that is, because it can create a powerful, powerful campaign on the back end. Okay, number 3, positioning your campaign for success. So just like in a war, again, it has to be very, very strategic in nature, but you have to understand who your competition is and who the customer is, really. You have to understand all the players involved, and most importantly, your customer. You have to know who they are. And really the only way you can get to that is through research. We highly recommend that our own customers research their customers in an ongoing way, at least 1 quarter per year, and always trying to get at, who they are on a psychographic level, not just demographic, but who are they, what do they do, how do they spend their time, do they spend time on Pinterest, do they enjoy reading, do they enjoy gardening, what are those things that motivate them or that they find interesting or humorous or whatever it might be. I think I presented this in the last webinar, but one of my favorite acronyms is actually, I stole it from Tony Shai of Zappos, and he uses this acronym as a filter, and what it stands for is interesting, compelling, educational, and entertaining. And his mantra is that if it's not one of these, if they do any kind of promotion or any kind of campaign, if it's not one of these, then it's not worth doing. So it must be interesting, compelling, educational, entertaining to your customer, not to you, but to your customer. And the only way to figure out that is to do the research, to do the hard work. And research has become so accessible, especially with the online tools. There's no reason that you shouldn't be doing this on an ongoing basis to find out, what motivates them. You can certainly do focus groups. Customer advocates is a great way. In other words, you select 1,000 customers, or they volunteer to be to have research questions sent to them on an ongoing basis. And usually your very loyal customers have no problem with this, and you can get a couple thousand of them to respond on an ongoing basis. One-on-one interviews is a great way, especially for B2B. And then also, do an audit of what they're already saying about you, whether it be through customer reviews, online forums. But, constantly read what they're saying. And it's amazing because the why of your brand may reveal itself in reading that. It'll become so clear to you. And then one of my favorite techniques is what I call psychographic overlays. There are third-party companies out there that have created these clusters of customers that you can overlay your own database onto to learn more about them from a psychographic point of view. And they're pretty exhaustive, too, and actually affordable. So you might look into some of those. So a great case study, I think, of a brand, a 60-year-old brand that brought new life into the brand is Dove. And through quite a bit of research, they interviewed over 10,000 women to truly understand what it was they were selling. And at the end of the day, it was all about beauty. That's what they sell. But they also learned through the research that there was a gap, a severe gap in what women thought of beauty and what they thought of themselves. And that spawned the Real Beauty campaign. And what's so amazing about this, you may be surprised to learn that was launched over 10 years ago, but yet it's still relevant today. A great campaign, once you've figured out what it is, it could last for a decade. In this particular case, it's been over a decade. And you all recognize it, and it really breathes new life into the brand. But then a campaign sometimes needs a bump. And in this particular case, they've done a series of campaigns under that same campaign umbrella. In this case, they actually did the Sketch Artist campaign. And if you're not familiar with it, you might go online and Google it. It's really fascinating. But basically, women were asked to describe themselves, and a sketch artist drew it up without saying who they are. And then it was also asked of a stranger to describe the person. And the results were really quite dramatic, and it proved this gap that they discovered in what women think of themselves. Then there was a selfie campaign that was followed by that. And they also had the campaign where you tick the box. Here's this beautiful freckled woman. Is she flawed or flawless? It made us stop and think about what beauty was. Just a highly successful campaign, and Dove was literally a dying brand, and it's come back to life in many, many ways, and they just did an incredible job with it. So in my opinion, I just want to share this graphic very quickly, that the successful brands of the future are really going to be at either end of the pendulum. And on one end of the pendulum, you know these people. These are the brands that have made things so simple that you just can't help but do business with them, like Amazon. I don't want to do business with Amazon because I think they're killing marketing in America, but I can't help it because they make it so simple and so easy. The problem is you can't compete with them. It's very difficult to compete. They're what I call an oligarchy, and it's governed by a few. Not even a monopoly, an oligarchy. On the other end of the pendulum, however, is what I call the artisan brands. Those brands that have been able to carve out this extremely rich niche story that people gravitate toward, like Moose Jaw, Wild Oats, and Tom's. And you can't compete with them because they're one of a kind. But by crafting your story, you could become one of those. However, if you're selling, things that everybody else is selling, it becomes more difficult. However, Moose Jaw was able to do it. They're selling, they don't really necessarily sell proprietary products. They're selling things that their competitors do, but they've wrapped it up in this personality. Now, somewhere in the middle are most brands, unfortunately, but there's a way to combat that, and I think it's by being extraordinarily bold in your marketing, and sometimes irreverent. You've seen those irreverent brands. Who would have ever thought that insurance could be sold, by a gecko, or pistachio nuts could be sold by a honey badger. I find the Wonderful Pistachio story fascinating. They started these series of campaigns, a Get Crackin' campaign, and they would take pop culture, and within 30 days, they would find a twist with their own brand, like the honey badger, cracking the nut, or the cat playing the piano, cracking the nut, and on and on. What's fascinating about this, within 6 months of launching that campaign, Wonderful Pistachios grew by 260%. So if you don't believe that it doesn't work, that's proof right there. Another direct marketing brand that I think does an incredible job of taking what's maybe ordinary, like underwear, and really positioning themselves with a series of campaigns. They're willing to use words like buck naked, and they have this naked man, that runs around, or even in the way they sell product, taking product and building a campaign around a simple product like the buck naked man can. Look at this billboard. That was a bold act. Crouch without the ouch, their ballroom jeans. It's very bold in marketing, but it's working for them, and they're growing exponentially because of it. So another point on positioning for success that I want to make is really about the intense coordination that must occur. So once you understand the why and you've come up with the big idea, that brand umbrella, the big idea that you want to bring to market, creating that, bring it to market really truly requires that coordination across many, many levels. You have to make sure all those bits and pieces are in place. You don't want to just step out and do it. I mentioned before we are working on a campaign that's going to launch in 2016. Now, not all of them take that much time. I would say a good year is appropriate, but it does take time because you want to make sure that everything's in place. And the components can be just incredibly long. You might want a logo and a tagline to go with it. I'm a big believer in video marketing, an anthem video that really emotionally and quickly explains what the campaign's all about. You want concept copy so that everybody internally understands what the campaign's about and why you're doing it. One of the most important components are the calls to action. How are you going to get people to engage in that campaign? Cross-channel engagement. Are you going to ask them to do something? What about an engagement funnel? Ultimately, we want to make money, right? So is there a way that we can get them to engage and move them into that funnel? It requires a communication plan. When are we going to launch? How are we going to launch it? How much is it going to cost? Can we expect some kind of an ROI? And if it's powerful enough, if preliminary or a soft launch says it's powerful enough, maybe PR is a good idea to get it out there, to get the word out there, and maybe get it into bigger news platforms. In creating all the campaign assets, though, it's really, that's kind of the legwork. And it requires really truly understanding the empathetic stories that support that campaign. So that it's a series of stories, or maybe one big story, that you have to create those components. And it might require some kind of a narrative. It might require merchandise. It might require all kinds of photography, copy, content, and then, of course, a video. And you want to have all those things in place so that they're assets that can be used across all channels. Many companies, unfortunately, are still siloed. But if you have this this place where all these assets reside, then retail can draw from it, social can draw from them, e-commerce, print, all those different channels can draw from those assets. I want to just very briefly talk about video because I think it's so powerful, and the ones that go viral typically do have a video. So, but they're not easy to do because they have to be quick, they have to be powerful, and they have to be meaningful, especially to your customers. Just a couple stats to prove this out, and I'm sure you know it, but get this. Of 80% of Internet users who watched a video, 46% took some sort of action after viewing. That's crazy. Users spend 88% more time on sites with a video. Wow. Video and an email can increase click-through rates as much as 90%. So if email is part of your campaign of getting the campaign out, you'll want a video in that. And then this, video attracts 2 to 3 times as many monthly visitors, doubles time spent on a site, and has a 157% increase in organic traffic from search engines. Pretty powerful stuff. So very quickly, I'm going to show you a couple of case studies. One of them is a new brand in the marketplace, a couple of years old, called Shinola. And if you haven't been following them, I strongly recommend that you go on their site and check them out. They use video in a very, very powerful way. Now, when you ask me what they sell, it's kind of interesting because the merchandise concept makes no sense at all. They sell watches, handmade bicycles, leather goods, and planners. And you're thinking, what in the world? What do they have to do? What do they have in common? Well, they've been able to pull it together with something very rich. And I think it's better. Well, they're from Detroit, but it's all made in America. So I think, again, I want to show you their anthem video. Now, I don't know how this is going to work in a webinar, so forgive me if the sound isn't very good. But just watch the video, and you can see how powerfully they've been able to tie this merchandise concept together.
Welcome to Detroit, the new watchmaking capital of America, where a long-gone industry is beginning its ascent. Here, in 30,000 square feet of Midtown, using steel, leather, and labor to make watches of quality that haven't been made this way in this country for more than 40 years. It's an effort to retake our place out on the factory floor. It takes work to return to form, but we're up for it, starting with the reinvigoration of a storied American brand and of this storied American city. We are also crafting hand-built bicycles and leather goods made with hides from America's oldest working tanneries. We are doing this because we believe in the beauty of industry, the glory of manufacturing. We know there's not just history in this town, there's a future. It's why we came, creating a community that will thrive through excellence of craft and pride of work. Shinola, where American is made.
So forgive me if the quality wasn't fantastic. I wasn't sure how the GoToWebinar would work, but do go on their website, and you can see their, all of their different videos that do such a great job of tying it together. And I would guess at the end of the day, after watching that video, I think what their higher order benefit is probably pride. You just feel that sense of pride from their people, the video, the way they talk about their product. And if you buy one of these products, you'll be proud of it as well. Very, very clever. And I like the way that they've executed product campaigns. And one in particular that I thought was very clever. They had this limited edition watch that they called the Great American Series, and this one was the Wright Brothers limited edition watch. And it came not just with a case, but it came with a book along with it. And they didn't stop at the watch. They tied it in with a bike. They had the Wright Brothers limited edition Runwell, the bike. So they were able to tie these together through a campaign. Very clever. So another case study I'm presenting just to emphasize the cross-channel engagement, how important that is. And in this particular case study, I want to talk about Crate & Barrel, who did a fantastic job. About a year and a half ago, they produced this campaign. And they took their brand down to the very essence of who they are. It was all about the and. It was a brilliant campaign. because the ampersand is what they're all about, bringing people together, bringing things together, bringing rooms together. And again, I want to share their anthem video. It was so well done, clean, inexpensive. It didn't take, a lot of money to produce this, but it was so powerful. So again, forgive me for the quality, but here it is.
I feel so happy, I'll stop calling you. It's all about you tonight and
I dare you, if your foot wasn't tapping, I promise you mine was. So it's all about the ampersand, and it was so cool the way they built their website even. When the drop-down box in the department category, it wasn't just the category. It was about dining and entertaining, kitchen and food, decorating and accessories. They had the bed and bath sale. And when they talked about their designers, it was artists and designers, and their 50th anniversary, 50th and forever. So across all channels, they really solidified this, even with their merchandise that they created. Very, very well executed, well planned, and well coordinated. On Facebook, during Mother's Day, there was 11 Mom campaign that they promoted products that fit under that umbrella. Mom and daughter, they even had a Pinterest page on things that mom and daughter could do. And then even in their catalog, they promoted this mom and daughter campaign, again, with products, and promoted. They didn't call it a video, they call it play film. And I'll share that with you too, because it's just as sweet. Don't you love it? I love that. So you've done a great job when your concept goes viral. And in this case, they had several people kind of copy what they were doing. In this case, it was several couples that were getting married. They created a Save the Date video, doing something very similar. In this case, Courtney and Mike, made a video very similar. So very successful. So, and finally, while I close this out, I want to reiterate the back-end strategy. I mentioned the engagement funnel because at the end of the day, we want to make money, right? And this is a very difficult concept for direct marketers. Everything has to be measurable. And in a brand campaign, you're not always able to do that. But you can control some of it. And as much as you can, you should. Again, it's like a funnel. If you get 20,000 hits on a video, can you create a call to action that gets them to come in the door, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be on your website or in the store, that ultimately leads to a purchase? So if you can think through what are those engagement strategies, what are the offers that I can create that will help capture their name and maybe their email address, and how am I going to communicate them proactively so that they'll come back? What are the strategies I can do and put in place and to get them to a purchase? And this requires a lot of planning, cross-channel planning with other people within your company to make sure everything is in place and everything is there and ready to go before the launch date. So again, brand stickiness is really, at the end of the day, about customer excitement because we want to get that loyalty. And the brands that have embraced these kinds of concepts, what they've discovered is that customers are willing to pay more, your brand becomes more memorable, it increases your chance for social engagement and viral activity, but most important, they're more loyal. That's ultimately what we're seeking. And as Margaret Thatcher said, you may have to fight a battle more than once to win it. And that's so true, because your first brand campaign may not be hit out of the ballpark, but you'll learn a lot. We have a saying around our company, progress, not perfection. You know, we have to inch toward that ballpark win. And through just tenacious planning, you can get there. Well, thank you very much for the time. I had planned on being about 30 minutes long so that we could open it up for questions. And McKay, at this time, if you're okay, I'll go ahead and take questions.
That's great. Yeah, great presentation. Enjoyed it very much. A lot of good information shared. Let's hop right into questions. We've got a few outstanding. Type in your questions, everybody, and we'll address those as quickly as we can with Lois. So please type the questions in, and we'll address those to her. I think the first question, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask one of myself, because after I did the presentation, I realized that I hadn't included any B2B examples.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and yes, the answer is B2B companies absolutely can create brand campaigns. You know, they may not have the viral effect that a consumer one, but it should have the viral effect within that community of people or within your target audience. And I think they're much more difficult in a B2B setting, but can be totally achievable, again, if you follow that format of understanding at the end of the day what you're selling, because you are selling to people. And what's interesting, a great one can get a lot of attention from the consumer world, even though you necessarily don't want it, but you still can create more brand awareness.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, did I cut you off, Lois? I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to ask a question and answer it. That's all I had.
Okay. So let's get into a few questions here then. First question is, you mentioned this a little bit, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it was at the start of the presentation where you talked about how branding in today's day and age is kind of getting overlooked, maybe, or ignored, or whatever word you want to use. Mm-hmm. What is the best way, and this is the most common question I think most marketers have with branding, how do you measure the effectiveness of a brand campaign specifically, or branding generally? I mean, how do you know if it's working?
Yes, that's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately I don't have a great answer. You either do it well or you don't. It's very hard to do a test to even head-to-head, especially if you're in a multi-channel environment. You can do small attempts at it, say if you mail a catalog and you have one highly branded, one not. But it requires so much more than that. Branding is more than just a catalog. It's how you answer the phone. It's how you treat people. It's the box experience when you ship something. What's the experience out of the box? What I can tell you, though, anecdotally, the brands that we know that have made a big impact and truly embraced their higher order benefit, and then in a very significant way, changed all of their efforts overall, not just in one area, we've seen an immediate, as much as 30% increase in response. Yeah, and I can share one with you because he's said that I can do that before. There's a company, a B2B company actually, called Eastwood, and they sell equipment and solutions for people that are renovating their vehicles, both to job shops and to individuals. And at the end of the day, their higher order benefit was, well, what they did that was unique is do the job right. If you're going to renovate your car, do it right. But the higher order benefit was pride. She's your baby, do it right, and have pride in that. So when they infused this whole story throughout all of their pieces, they saw an immediate 28% increase in response with nothing else changed. So unfortunately I don't have a strict answer for you because, brand at the end of the day is the perception that people have of you. And so our job is to manage that perception or change that perception. And so either you do it or you don't.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Okay, we've got a lot of good questions here now, so let me go through some of these, Lois.
Okay.
All right. Nancy asked, regarding B2B companies, campaigns, especially with a complex sale? What resources would you recommend to understand how to make a brand campaign successful?
What resources? Well, I think, first of all, it's going to require a time, and it requires a brand champion, somebody that's going to head up the effort. And I honestly believe, and I'm not trying to do a commercial because there's a lot of great people out there, sometimes an outside perspective can really help in that process. But, before you launch that campaign, the first thing I think is to truly understand your brand, like I said in my presentation, and understand at the end of the day what it is you're selling. And then through research, finding out what can appeal to your customer, your target audience. So as far as resources go, oh boy, I may have to get back with you on that one. You're welcome to email me, and I don't know if there's any really good books, because I think for direct marketers, it's much more difficult because we don't have that one-on-one contact with the customer always. But coming up with the big idea is kind of the hardest part, and then it becomes very, very, very tactical in coordinating all those efforts.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this too. Let me back up a bit on B2B. Sometimes it's not always. You mentioned a complex decision process. Sometimes it requires a 2 or 3 step process. Just getting awareness, getting them excited. But if ultimately what you're trying to do is like get a quote, and you can then turn those into a sale. There's maybe the campaign, the ultimate goal of the campaign is to get a quote in the door, just to kind of try you on for size, so to speak. So understanding that decision process is really critical in building a campaign as well.
Makes sense. Okay, Marianne asks, actually, let's go to Dan's question. He says, we're facing a rebranding after 30 years in business. We're looking for new direction. Where would you start? What would you tackle first? Is there any specific change that maybe snowballs the progress? He says, and everything is on the table, by the way. I'm not sure what that means, Dan, but I'm intrigued. So give us, how do you rebrand? How do you, if you're changing the name of your company or changing the feel or a product, how do you go about that?
Right. We have a process that we've walked customers through that I'll share. And there's 4 parts to it. The first part is really what we call the discovery phase. And the discovery phase is really trying to, it's the research. Who are we? It's answering those 3 little questions, but it's really trying to get at, are we losing customers? Are we gaining customers? Why do they stay with us? Just trying to get all the information up front and trying to learn as much as you can about the customer, either through primary or secondary research. The second stage is what we call define. And you probably heard the term, your brand DNA. And that's about defining really who you are. And I should say that's where you answer those 3 little questions. To understand who are you, what do you do that's unique and different, and if it's not, what can you do, and where do you want to be, and then why does it matter? And at that stage is when you start crafting the brand manual or your brand promise even, and defining what that is, the DNA of who you are. And it absolutely requires input from the top executive levels. I've seen rebranding efforts just fall flat on their face. It has to be embraced by the people at the top. Sometimes it even makes sense to bring, if the founder is still around or alive, to bring that back in. What we've found in working with people is that it's already there in most cases. It's like an onion, just peeling back the layers to get to the point where you can find it again. So going back to your roots is sometimes a really good way to do it. The third is design. We've got a D thing going. The third one is design. And that's where you take that, like in the case of wine tasting, we realize that layering of the Napa Valley and the sharing, where you take all those components and start articulating what it might look like in an email, what it might look like within the pages of a catalog or a direct mail piece, what it might look like online. How do you infuse that, that language into all your different pieces? And then the fourth part is deploy, where you literally deploy it. And that's, when you start thinking about a brand campaign. I personally wouldn't do a brand campaign until I've done the first 3 things. So then you've got this new brand. Things are going well. What can we do to really connect with our customers? And that's when you start thinking about the big idea. Okay, so that's a process that we use. It's I think other agencies use very similar ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, it seems like such. I think you're right to break it up, because if you just try to think of a rebrand, and
you'll start with the logo.
Exactly, that's right. So you've got to kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time,
Yeah, and again, I'll just reiterate that it's not about the identity. The identity comes later in stage 3. If you need to rewrite your tagline, don't start with the tagline. Start with answering those 3 questions, because the tagline will then reveal itself.
Right. So let's talk. There's 2 more questions here that I want to get into before we run out of time. So this is from Ray, and he says, most of my clients are very small business owners with very generic type businesses, but I wanted to create a very strong connection, as you've described. For instance, a tree service that's so basic and generic that we're having trouble trying to figure out how to set them apart from the hundreds of other businesses that do what they do. So businesses that are commodities, for lack of a better term. There's 30 companies that do what they do. How do you help a business create that emotional connection with their customers?
Yeah, that's a loaded question that might require a lot more digging. But I can tell you that once you understand what it is you're really, really selling, and then what your customers really, really need, then you can create platforms, to help them get to that, to help them what they want. I'm thinking of a B2B brand that we worked with years ago that sold massage products, oils, lotions, tables, things like that, to spas and resorts. And they had a wide variety of customers, from the person that did out of their home to these big chains. And at the end of the day, the products that they produced, especially their massage lotions, they were very safe. That was the higher order benefit. It was safe. It didn't have peanut oils, alcohol, things like that. But in trying to connect with these small business owners and the smaller guys, they found success by trying to help them. At the end of the day, they were helping them grow their business. So they would offer all kinds of recipes for success and tips and how-tos and things like that. And it became kind of an end destination and provided the content online for the kind of content that their customers wanted. So again, going back to the research, how can we help you? Or how does my product help you grow? And are there other ways that I can help you, do that? And I'd be more than happy to, spend a few minutes on the phone with that gentleman to try and learn more about, what his challenge is.
Yeah, that may be wise. So Ray, if you want to reach directly out to Lois, and I'll make sure that you can reach out to each other, because that, I think, is useful. Okay, last question, and then we'll be done. So Dan asks, he says, social media can help brands identify brand champions and advocates. What's an effective way to integrate these individuals, so these influencers, into a brand strategy?
Well, absolutely. I mentioned the brand advocates, people that already love you. One of the first things that you can learn from them, what is their perception of who you are? You might find it varies a lot, or it's quite different than what you think it is. So understanding their perception. And if they truly love you, they're willing to engage and spend time with you. I mentioned this one apparel brand that we've worked with before. They had 1,500 customers that they would go out to on a regular basis, asking them things as simple as, do you like this pattern for a sewing suit or this pattern better? And 100% of the time, that curated crowdsourcing type event would win. They were right 100% of the time. So if you have strong brand advocates already, if you can invite them in to become, call them something, name it something special, and you can reward them, but chances are you won't even need to. but go out to them on a regular basis, asking them, specific questions. They will respond. It's amazing. If they love you already, they're the key to finding out why and how to get other people to love you just as much.
Yeah, and I think today with the and we talked about PR. You just talked about PR briefly, but sort of the new PR in my mind is actually done through influencers. It's really changed.
Right.
So that's another aspect of the brand campaign as well. So.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Well, Lois, thanks for your time. That was fantastic stuff. Everybody, thanks for taking the time to listen. You can watch this webinar and others at logmycalls.com/webinar. logmycalls.com/webinar. Lois, any final thoughts before we go?
No, I'm available for any follow-up questions if anybody has them, but I just thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And everybody have a wonderful afternoon. And watch for an email from us tomorrow that will have the webinar recording attached to it. So thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.